Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Cannabis Unlocked. Today, I'm your host, Jordan Youkilis, founding partner at Key Investment Partners. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by my friend, Kelly Coyne. Kelly, how are you today?
I'm so well. Thank you for having me, Jordan.
Absolutely. Super excited to talk to you here. We've gotten to know each other over the last couple years in Colorado as two of the few investors still actively putting money to work in cannabis.
Absolutely.
Um, but now that we get to 2024, I think it's looking like we're going to be well rewarded for sticking through the fight.
I really hope so. I do think that we are going to see there are so many things on the horizon, from regulations, and even just where the market is turning that I really believe we will see cannabis growth. But also I think for someone like me, even in this tough time, this is an excellent opportunity to take advantage of the current environment, and really try to see what can be done with distressed assets.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So maybe taking a step back, would love if you would talk a little bit about your professional background, your career trajectory, and how you ended up at D4 Investments.
Yeah, not a problem. So I started my career in tech, actually, and I spent most of my career in really early stage startups. My specialty was deep tech, think rockets and robots, and artificial intelligence heavily. So in about 2016, I started my first venture capital firm. It was called Grit Ventures, and we specialized in artificial intelligence and robotics. In 2021, I left that firm and joined D4 Investments, where at the moment we invest in a number of asset classes, but our focus at this moment is what we're calling micro private equity, for distressed assets. So we're really taking a look at we look at many different types of markets. Right now, we're looking at cannabis because it's an excellent opportunity to take advantage of the distressed asset market and see what you can do to roll those into a larger, well-functioning entity.
Fantastic. And my understanding is that the founders of D4 generated a good portion of their income from doing a similar model in European telco and then identified similar characteristics in cannabis. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so all of D4, the entire D4 team, we are all operators at our hearts, that we've all moved on to the investment side of the house. My other two partners at D4, Jim Kinsella and Bob McNeil, they took, most notably, they had two very large exits in the technology and telecommunications markets, where they took advantage of a distressed market, a highly regulated distressed industry, but a highly regulated distressed industry that is also secularizing. And what we mean by that is that these are industries that there is going to be continued demand. Much like cannabis, we knew there was going to be more demand for internet and telecommunications, but for some reason, the internet was distressed. That did not have to do with that level of demand from customers. And so the D4 team has historically made their money from taking those distressed markets, rolling up assets, and creating a really functioning larger entity.
Wow, that's awesome. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about how you all first identified the cannabis market, how you kind of landscaped what it looked like today, and then ultimately found your first investment in the space, Talarya.
Yeah. So Jim and Bob sold their last company in 2018 and came back to the United States and started looking around for what were markets that really made sense to do this in. While they were doing that, we invested in a number of different markets, and just general venture capital investment as we started to learn more about markets. We honed in on the cannabis market because we really did think that it was starting to look similar to these other secularizing distressed industries we had seen before. And so our entire team is really interested in the alternative substance market, just because we do think that this is where the future is headed and that there are significant world positive gains to be had from trying to move people away from alcohol and towards healthier, more positive substances. So we were already interested. We saw it start to look like those markets we had seen. We did some initial investing and then eventually realized we wanted to do a roll up. We talked to more than 100 companies, 100 CEOs, trying to find someone that we thought could be at the helm of this project. And we got very lucky in meeting Better Than Good, which is now Talarya. And the co-founders of that were Dustin Milner and Scott Rakiza. And they're fabulous. Like in my entire career working with some of founders that were considered Silicon Valley darlings in technology, I have not had a team that I have been more delighted to work with on a daily basis.
Wow.
So we feel really lucky. And one of the reasons it's really interesting is that these guys have seriously extreme experience in not only the cannabis industry, but in turning around distressed assets. And so it wasn't that we had to just find people that we thought were smart and capable and teach them how to be turnaround specialists. They already were for this specific industry. And now we are collaborating with them on kind of the finer points from the business and financial side.
Yeah. That's great. And, one of the things that we've talked about in the past that continues to be a major issue today is that cannabis has really struggled to attract high quality management teams and founders who have had successful exits. And, I don't know if that's because the industry is so hard to operate in and understand, or the stigma, maybe a little bit of both. But could you talk about, what that has caused for the industry?
I think there's a lot of issues with it. So I think one of the big things that we see, and particularly you and I have talked about this so many times, Jordan, about my belief that one of the major things that is affecting this industry is really the lack of a large institutional capital base.
Mm-hmm.
That ecosystem simply does not exist in the way it does in so many other industries.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly this is because of sin clauses in people's LPAs. So I think that has really affected the industry in so many ways. When people originally came into the industry in, let's call it 2018 or before, there was a bunch of money flooding in, but it was really family offices. It was that early stage money going into the market. We saw bigger amounts of money and more institutional capital being able to go into places like Dutchy that were non-leaf touching. But really the leaf touching part of the industry has had a much harder go of it.
Mm-hmm.
So many people that are originally attracted to the industry were attracted just because they really liked cannabis. And that's great. And we do love people that love our products and are there for that. But if that's the only driving reason, sometimes there is a mismatch with folks' ability to really move a startup into a multi-billion-dollar company.
Yeah.
And then the other problem is because once we started getting a little bigger, that was 2018, by the time 2020 hit, we already had people starting to pull back from cannabis. And so really, we never hit that moment where we could start paying the types of salaries in the leaf touching side of the industry where we could poach real experts from other industries.
Yeah.
And truly, that's how we see so many industries grow. I mean, if you think about, artificial intelligence and robotics, there weren't a ton of expert CMOs and CFOs in AI and robotics sitting around, but we poached them from other similar industries.
Mm-hmm.
We are not able to poach those great talent from like CPG industries yet.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And also the rules aren't the same across, so it's a little difficult.
Yeah, and I think, it's a great point you bring up with regards to management salaries. And I think that also plays into another major issue for the industry, in that they just don't have the free cash flow to pay the lobbyists that they need to hire to actually get these changes made in DC. And, when you're going up against the lobbying budgets of big pharma on an industry that's early stage and taxed on gross profit, it's pretty tough.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's talk about brands in the industry.
Yeah.
Obviously, through Talarya, you've made a big bet that brands is where the industry is going, and that's certainly our view as well. I think, one of the learnings Key has had as we came in is that we thought brands would really develop faster than they did. And I think a lot of that just comes to more of the structural issues we've talked about, where at the end of the day, it's like, if you can get product on the shelf and operate profitably and pay your employees, like that's what's needed. Now we're kind of getting to that cannabis 2.0 phase, where I think that brands are going to play an even more significant role. But yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that overall.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it comes back to, I think everything that we're seeing and the fallout that we're seeing around brands, we're seeing a lot less people be interested in investing in brands because a bunch of brands are collapsing. The reason for that is that comes back to this ecosystem. so many different companies started, and they started as if they were a tech startup, that they were going to raise a friends and family round, and then a pre-seed, and then a seed, and then a Series A from a large institutional. And then by the time they were hitting their Series B, Series C, they'd start to be thinking about trying to get profitable, but there would be tons of money waiting on the sidelines for them. It's not a crazy thought. It exists in so many other industries, just not this one. And so I think we all thought that was going to develop faster. And so the time and effort wasn't really put into reaching profitability in those earlier stages. And it needed to be put in for people to survive. So I think that people that are really focusing on fundamentals, focusing on not growth at all costs, but smart growth where they are still making money and not being just sinkholes to funding, those are going to be the people that are going to survive.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. And I think it's really exciting to see brands really start to emerge. And as we think about like the major product categories, right? There's really flower, vape, and edibles as we think about it today. I think beverages will be a huge category eventually. It's not there yet. But of those first three that I mentioned, with vapes and edibles, it's generally a little bit easier to move across state lines because it's extracted product. And so you don't need as much control of the supply chain. Flower is obviously proven to be a bit more difficult. So I'm curious, like, how do you think about that for Talarya's growth? Obviously, their core brand today is Cream of the Crop, which is some of the best flower I've ever smoked. But, obviously, again, it gets back to that. Yeah. Gets back to that issue of, you can't just have a cultivation facility in California and ship across state lines, at least not yet.
Yeah, and that's been a huge thing for us because as you know, Talarya is currently a California product.
Mhm.
And as we start to think about our next steps, that's something that we've really realized we're not sure everyone is thinking as carefully about as they should. If you Talarya is mostly known for its flower. We are now becoming rapidly well known for our vapes. So that's going to be helpful because that is a formula that you can ship across state lines and produce the same thing in California as you can in Colorado, as you can in Arizona. But that isn't true with flower. In order to do that with flower, you need to be people that are like us, that are managing your own cultivation, that have a serious set of SOPs. And then you have to go buy a cultivation and start running that. So I think that as we see different companies trying to expand geographically is well timed with the increase in vape positivity that we're seeing and the fact that we're seeing so many people transfer to that and to edibles anyway. But I do think it's going to be difficult to see companies try to maintain the quality of flower across state lines until they can ship it across.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so just be interesting to see, that's what's so challenging about our industry is like what can be a great model today, just with regulatory change, you don't know how it's going to be impacted. So you got to be able to adapt.
Well, and that's definitely something we've definitely spent some time thinking about IHD, if there is something there, so that we can start thinking about how to get consistent quality product across state lines prior to federal legalization. But I think the point is that it's so, without really knowing when that's going to happen, it is difficult to truly time things right.
Yeah, totally. So let's talk about the end consumers of cannabis.
This is my favorite topic, Jordan.
I love it. I love it.
I'm so happy because my family can be so happy because they are so tired of hearing me talk about this. They are so done with my stats.
Well, yeah, maybe I'll just leave a little open-ended to start. What do you think about cannabis and the demographics we're seeing for, who is adopting cannabis now that's been legalized?
Yeah, so I think so there's a couple different things. So I want to get into the different demographics, but overall, we are seeing a massive shift in the overall mentality in the United States of how they think about cannabis in comparison to alcohol, or really alcohol in general. I think what I found absolutely fascinating is in 2023, 16% of Americans that could drink successfully completed dry January.
Wow.
This year, 25%. That is an enormous number.
Yeah.
To have this many people looking at their relationship with alcohol and saying, oh, I need to think more critically about this. And I think we know so well ourselves that when you start thinking about removing alcohol from your lifestyle, you realize that there are other substances that are so much better for your overall mental health, the happiness of yourself, your family. And I think that that's a lot of what is driving this shift is
Mhm.
people that are looking for this lifestyle change.
Mhm.
I think there's two really big buckets. So first of all, I will say the data is, as I'm sure you know, is absolutely amazing around what we see when people choose to move from alcohol to cannabis. And this is specifically not alcohol to no alcohol, alcohol to cannabis. We see a decrease in violent crime, likelihood of sexual assault, likelihood of domestic violence, even the likelihood of divorce is reduced.
Hmm.
So many aspects of your life are improved when you move from alcohol to cannabis.
Yeah.
And I think this is catching hold.
Yeah.
We are seeing the biggest movement, though, I think in two areas. Number one, we are definitely seeing the thing that's been so interesting for me, I know, as a suburban mom, is it's been amazing to see this shift happening just in my little suburban areas. And I can't imagine this happening in the generation before, where, first of all, so prior to moving to Colorado, I had spent the last 10 years in downtown San Francisco. And so I knew what a downtown lifestyle looked like. And moving to suburbia is really different. And one of the things that I felt like were when I first got here in 2020 was, wow, like the drinking culture is really loud and proud out here.
Hmm.
And just in the last 4 years, I have seen so many people, particularly women and mothers, saying, how can I change my life?
Hmm.
What are the different substances that I can try that are not alcohol? And I just hear this conversation happening everywhere. And that is so exciting to me and so exciting for our next generation that they're just going to have, more checked in parents. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
But the other portion that is amazing is Gen Z.
Mhm.
Gen Z is drinking so much less than ever before.
Mhm.
And so we see that 28% of college Gen Z abstains compared to 20% in 2002. That's an enormous difference for alcohol companies. When I mentioned before that 25% of Americans successfully completed dry January, 35% of Gen Z did.
Wow.
That's an enormous amount of that up and coming alcohol generation that is not drinking nearly as much as anyone else did at that same age.
Mhm.
And so I think what we are going to see all of this translating to the cannabis industry is as we near legalization, as we near rescheduling, this is going to open the doors even wider for a larger range of acquirers.
Mhm.
And that, I think, for us as venture capitalists, that's something that's extremely exciting.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, and it's really cool to see that, and I know we've both personally had that experience of, shifting off of alcohol and using cannabis as an effective substitute and, can attest to all the benefits that's brought with it. Now, I do think a lot of the early days of the cannabis industry have developed around catering to kind of the high frequency, high potency consumer,
Yeah.
and so I don't necessarily love that aspect of it. I think that will start to normalize, and you're seeing, like low dose edibles is one of the fastest growing categories. But my concern is certainly that we go too far in the other direction where now people are just getting too stoned out of their gourd all the time, where it stops being, really a benefit and it starts being something that hinders you.
I completely agree with you. And I think that I do think that it is the demographics and the reasons for switching to cannabis are going to drive that. So for
Mhm.
instance, I will say like most suburban moms, when they talk about, doing some cannabis, they're talking about like 2.5 milligrams, right? 2.5 milligram edible, like it is definitely, they're not running hard. But the thing is, they are also, many of them are doing it every night,
Mhm.
and they're not as cost conscious as a lot of other
Good
demographics.
point.
So I think that we are definitely going to see that lifestyle shift cannabis user is going to have a positive impact on the market, because I absolutely agree with you.
Mhm.
We I know both of us are passionate about this industry for many reasons. One of them being the improvement on lifestyle and what we believe is the health of our nation, our world. If you can choose better substances, that goes away at a certain level of
Yeah,
usage.
yeah.
But I also think Gen Z is going to be the other factor, right?
Yeah.
They're not quitting drinking because they've been doing it for 20 years and they're realizing the toll it's taking on their body and they have kids. That's not what's turning them away. What's turning them away is the fact that they don't want to be that out of their minds.
Yeah.
And so hopefully their desires and their drive is going to be one of those things that starts to make the market really pay attention to lower dose.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's kind of one of those things where you're seeing the pendulum swinging, right? Where, the fentanyl crisis has gotten so out of control. I think the general public has become so disillusioned with big pharma and just the regulatory structure that it's like we're kind of at this breaking point where we need to have a more robust come to Jesus moment as a country just around how we've historically treated drugs versus medicines and what we're really doing in terms of promoting health and human physiology.
Absolutely. I think you couldn't be more right. I think we are having an entire generation of people, and not to be this person, but I do think that TikTok is a big part of this. I think that we are seeing this entire generation of people that are really having an understanding of the fact that there are substances that can do so much for your mind and your mood and your emotions that are not created only by the pharmaceutical companies or the alcohol companies. And so I think that we are having an entire generation of people that are starting to experiment with having lion's mane mushrooms instead
Yeah.
of coffee. And, I mean, it's this whole group of people that are really looking at all of these different substances. And as we see right on the back of cannabis, we know psilocybin is right there. And so what we do with cannabis is going to have an effect on the next grouping of drugs that could be used for, as we know, antidepressants, anti-anxiety. So I think that I would hope that our legislation realizes that this is a bigger question than just cannabis.
Totally.
And your hand's going to be forced one way or another. So try to do it in a way that is, more positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And that brings up one of the demographic shifts that has been really positive as well that we actually haven't touched on yet. And that's with the elderly generation, right? And I think that they, historically lean more conservative. They have been, they've spent more of their life in that war on drugs, Nancy Reagan just say no type era. But then, as medical cannabis has been more available, more and more of them have used it instead of opioids or SSRIs to great effect. And I think that's why we've seen Republicans as a whole in general, become more favorable to cannabis over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably one of the big driving factors there is the opioid crisis. The fact that everybody is looking for a way to not have to get an opioid prescription ever, because we know that that's such a dangerous cycle to become a part of. And so what are the alternative options out there? And I know that, we had one of our investors had back surgery and I'm sending him, kratom and trying to figure out how can we, allow people to have these alternative options. But I completely agree. I think that cannabis for pain is something that could be such a harm reduction move for our nation as a whole.
Yeah. Well, Kelly, this has been such a fun conversation as always.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to talk to you anytime, Jordan.
Absolutely. If there are folks who are listening who want to get in touch about maybe potential investment or partnership with Talarya, anything like that, any way they can reach out?
Yeah, I'd say, from a cannabis perspective, right now, we are absolutely always looking for distressed opportunities to roll into Talarya and across the board, retail, cultivation, manufacturing, and across geos. So if you would like to get in touch with us, I would love that. Please, you can email me at kelly@d4investments.com.
Amazing. Well, thanks again,
Thank
Kelly,
you
and I
so
hope
much.
you have a great afternoon.
All right. Thanks, Jordan.